State your name, the organization that you represent, and whether or not you intend to speak to some of the fact sheets that you put together or have submitted, or intend to do some kind of presentation relative to those fact sheets today. So with no further ado, I'm going to go ahead and call on Bonnie. So good afternoon, Bonnie.
Good afternoon, Janine. Hello, everybody. Delighted to be with you this afternoon. And I work with Primavera. I'm the Public Policy Education and Research Officer. And I've been working with Lisa on a presentation this afternoon, but she'll be taking the lead on that. I'll be here just to add anything if needed. And I'll pass it over, if I can, to Anthony Bruno.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm actually Tony Bruno to my friends, and I think you're all friends. I work for Valley Assistance Services in rural Pima County, basically everything south of Pima Mine Road over toward Sassabee.
Great. Thank you, Tony. I appreciate it. And then Lisa Florin.
Hi, I'm Lisa Florin. I am the Senior Director of Financial Wellness at United Way. And yes, I did my best to try to put together a fact sheet and presentation that would relate to community assistance and a lot of housing and homelessness. However, I see Dan Sullivan here. So if Dan is also planning to present, I don't know, he might have even a wider view and scope than I am. So hopefully we could do that in tandem. And yeah, Tony, I was just in Valley Assistance Services about a month ago doing some trainings. I didn't see you, so it's nice to, I guess.
I'm up in the eagle's nest.
Okay. I did not climb any stairs or anything, so. All right. With that, I'll pass it to Lisa Reams.
Hello. Lisa Reams, I'm the Vice President for Programs and Services at Pima Council on Aging. We're the area agency on aging for all the older adult services in Pima County. I did put together a fact sheet, and I'm happy to do a very brief presentation on that as well.
All right, thank you, Lisa. And I'm going to go ahead and extend the next opportunity for introductions to Chris McNamara.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Chris McNamara. I'm the Vice President of Rehab Services at Beacon Group, and I'm not planning on doing a presentation today.
Right, great, thank you. And then I'm going to go ahead and allow Steve Nath to go ahead and introduce.
Good afternoon. I'm Steve Nath. I'm the Operations Manager for Hope Inc.
Thank you, Steve. Appreciate that. And then Dan Sullivan.
Howdy, afternoon, everybody. It's my first meeting here, but I'm Dan. I'm the Director of Pima County Community and Workforce Development. I think I've presented in front of this committee, God, like a decade ago about SSBG. So thank you for all the work that you all do. You know, again, I'm replacing after a while the late and great Danny Tailuki. So I found out about that yesterday. So I don't necessarily have anything planned. But you know, just out of transparency, you know, my department does receive SSBG block grant funding. So I don't know, you know, conflict of interest or anything like that. But happy where appropriate to lend any insight on other panelists. But very happy to be a new member of this group. So thanks very much.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And then I see Jessica Winchester.
Hi, everyone. Sorry, my video is not turning on. I apologize for that. I'm Jessica Winchester, and I'm the Vocational Services Director and Program Administrator at Catholic Community Services.
Great. Thank you, Jessica. And then I'm going to kind of circle back and make sure I didn't miss anyone in as people are registering at different times or logging in at different times. Let's see. I think I introduced everyone. All right, so I think with no further ado, we'll go ahead and move to the next item on the agenda. So for the next item on the agenda is regard to our in-kind form. And so, of course, regional planning efforts are enhanced by recording time donated by attendees, such as yourself, volunteers, and participants. PAG collects the data on the time dedicated to those meetings and activities to apply for use as matching funds for grants and federal dollars. And so we ask that if you are paid with federal dollars, whether in entirety or in part, please let us know now verbally or through the virtual hand signal that you can put up through this platform, or send me an email so that we do not account for that time in our in-kind collection. So I see a couple hands going up, actually 3 if I'm not mistaken. So I'm making note of that. So thank you for that. And so time spent in preparation for this meeting will be estimated by PAG staff who are knowledgeable of the agenda and the associated meeting materials. And of course, at the conclusion of this meeting, the session report will automatically calculate your time spent in this meeting. And then, of course, time spent on PAG or RTA initiatives, programs, and special projects may also be eligible for consideration for matching funds. So I appreciate you sharing that information with us. All right, we're going to go ahead and move forward with the next item on the agenda. So at this stage, we're going to go ahead and start what we call the review of any submitted fact sheets or those that you have with you today as part of either speaking to it informationally or as kind of more of a formal presentation. I see Jessica's image there on screen. So Jessica, did you have your hand up?
I did not, but I am not sure why I popped up. That was interesting.
Oh, okay. That's all right. I just wanted to make sure I wasn't ignoring you on accident. Okay. So with regard to these particular presentations or sharing of information regarding those fact sheets that you had an opportunity to complete, I just want to do a quick reminder. So any presentations or fact sheets should not advocate for any one target group. And these presentations or the fact sheets should only present facts and data regarding demographics and needs and offer a regional perspective. And of course, as a reminder, this committee will discuss local issues and trends to determine local priorities. It will make funding recommendations for the service categories, not agencies, and it does not review any applications, reports, or have input into the state process once the plan is actually approved. So those are just some helpful reminders as we begin kind of the dialogue around those fact sheets or presentations. So we're going to go ahead and get started. And I believe I saw that 1 or 2 people were going to at least give a presentation or at least speak to their fact sheets today. And if I'm not mistaken, it looks like it was Lisa Florin and Lisa Reams. And I know Bonnie, you had shared you kind of working in tandem. And then I know Dan Sullivan, you had shared that you wanted to be respectful of making sure that we avoid any conflicts of interest. But given the guidelines and parameters that I shared, if you still feel like it's appropriate for you to provide any insights, we welcome you to add that into the discussions. All right, so we'll go ahead and lead off with Lisa Florin from, I believe, the United Way, and then followed by Lisa Reams from Pima Council on Aging. And then if anyone else joins this session while we're in the midst and they are actually presenting as well, we'll let them present as well. All right, so Lisa Florin, I'll let you go ahead and get started. Did you have anything that you needed us to share, like to allow you to share your screen?
I can share it if I can find it.
Okay. I want to make sure we give you those permissions to do that. So
yeah, I think I've got it.
All right.
All right. Great. Yes. So, I mean, I think many people said this is their first time working with this committee. This is, yeah, my second time coming to a meeting. My first one was about 2 weeks ago. So I really just, I saw this as kind of an exercise to bring together a whole bunch of information about needs and put it in one place. So it was actually kind of a good exercise in that respect. But I looked at a lot of the different areas that our funding covers and felt like with what I do at United Way, working with financial wellness, working with housing stability and homelessness, that it lined up most with the community assistance division and the service intents there. And partially because, yeah, when I looked over those services, it looked like they were more or less, it was some that were emergency shelter, which I often think of as like homelessness intervention, but then other supports that were more related to like preventing homelessness and preventing evictions, whether that was wraparound supportive services or legal assistance, and case management types of things. And then there was a special focus on survivors of sexual assault and also survivors of domestic violence. I'm going to be honest, I don't have a lot of background or awareness of what the trends are with sexual assault victims and survivors, but I do have a little bit of context on survivors of domestic violence, so I tried to incorporate that in here too. And yeah, I'll pause on each one too, Bonnie, if you want to chime in as I go. But just in terms of general needs of, where our community is on homelessness right now, our last point in time count, which happens every January, we had 2,100 individuals that were identified as being unhoused, and 9% of those people reported being survivors of domestic violence. Domestic violence is continuously noted as a top need and a top priority from our continuum of care. And there is, I feel like year after year, a call for needing more services and more supports for that really specialized population. We've also seen that calls for shelter and emergency shelter are the top need statewide to the 211 dashboard. 39% of the calls, I think in the past year or maybe during 2023, were for that request specifically. And the next highest one was for utility assistance, but that one was at about 17%. Also just wanted to note that there was a really great needs assessment that we did in our community in 2023 with the University of Arizona CIRO. And they went out and they talked to people that were unsheltered, living in encampments, and did focus groups and surveying to, hear directly from those people with the lived experience, what their needs were, what their thoughts were about how to improve services. And something that relates to this violence aspect is 38% of them identified bites, violence, and fear of injury as a major concern that they had. So while we have 9% that are already survivors of domestic violence, there's also a really large portion that are fearful they might become, part of that survivor group in the immediate future. Anything you want to chime in with, Bonnie? I can't really see anybody. All right, I'll keep going because I can't see any faces. You gotta yell if you need something. Oh, hello.
I think you're good. I think everyone can still hear you. I think I'm just going to remind those that are here, since there are cameras turned off, and like Lisa was sharing, it's kind of hard to get that visual cue. But if you do have a question or want something to add to what is being shared, please use the raise hand prompt that's the bottom of your screen, so we can make sure that we capture that.
Great, thank you. So then just going into kind of baseline needs, and I'll talk a little bit later on a future slide about how some of these things have changed from recent years. But I called it housing instability because I think this captures a lot of what the homelessness prevention and eviction prevention services would be aimed at. But we did have almost 13,000 evictions filed in Pima County in 2023. Initially in 2024, it looked like those were a little bit down, but we have seen that at least in July, they spiked dramatically. And even though, they're down, I mean, that's still a lot of people that are being pulled from their homes, and you would probably still want that number to be less. There's another pulse survey that happens maybe every 2 months. I'm not sure, but it's been going on since during the pandemic, and it's continued, and it's, I think, done by CIRO again. And they reach out to households continuously just to kind of touch base on a lot of key stability factors. And in the most recent one, which was in July, 26%, and this is Arizona wide, but 26% of the renters viewed eviction as very likely in the next 2 months. And that was up a lot as well. I think the previous report in April or May, it had only been 2%. So don't really want to speculate as to why that's happening, but just presenting the data that a lot of people are fearful of losing their housing. And then going back to that needs assessment survey, something that was interesting from the people that had lost their housing and are now unhoused, they said that the largest percentage said financial hardship was the reason that they ended up, becoming unsheltered. Bonnie, I can see your
I
hand
would
up,
just
please.
beautiful job, Lisa. But I would just add that spike this summer from June till July was like 88%. So this really dramatic spike, and we won't know until the next pulse survey, which will be out probably sometime this month or next, whether that sustains or whether that was kind of a fluke or something. But I think it really demonstrates the volatility in around evictions. That's a real concern for everybody.
Dan, did you want to add something too?
Yeah, and just wanted to say, the expert, and I'm no expert, Mr. Andy Flagg, we were actually looking at that data, and his hypothesis, and it's just a hypothesis, and I really hope that this bears out to be true, is that there were vacations and backups, that it's a fluke, but again, I think we're all sort of collectively watching it to make sure that it doesn't turn into something more terrible. So that's a little bit of hopeful thinking, but that's, as Andy really keeps an eagle eye on this stuff, was one of many insights sort of put on that. But thank you for bringing up the information.
Yeah, and keep chiming in with things that you've noticed or you've heard from Andy too. Tony, your hand's up.
Yeah, I'm just curious, have demographics been looked at by age group at all? If one age group has more propensity to be homeless than another?
Yeah, there's definitely some age group data related to homelessness. And I mean, I think, and I'm sure Lisa from PCOA might touch on this in her presentation as well. But yeah, the older adult population has definitely seen a big spike. People that are on fixed incomes especially have struggled to pay their rent and then maintain their housing. I feel like that was the biggest age demographic that probably popped out in that most recent point in time count.
And we know that part of what's fueling this have been the significant rent increases, which went up 40% between 2017 and today. So, that's really making it difficult for those folks on fixed incomes.
All right. With that, I'll keep going because I think we do dive in a little bit more into some of this in my other slides. So just thinking of like the change in the need in particular and how the numbers, Bonnie just mentioned that, yes, the need for rent assistance has gone up as like the prices have raised. That hasn't changed too much in the past year or two. Another just, number and change to note is that at the start of the pandemic, that's when we did see a really large spike in the number of people that were unhoused in our community. It went from being, around 1,000 to 1,300 every year during that count to being steadily over 2,000. So, 50% increase. And also that number, I don't think anybody who works in homelessness services or housing really thinks it's an accurate representation. I mean, it's a good measuring stick, but it's an undercount for sure. It doesn't capture a lot of people in situations where they are, if he's more or less homeless, maybe you're bunked up with somebody, or they're moving between a few different houses, or they might be living in their cars. We're not always able to catch every single person and account for them. But still, by the measurements we do use, there has been a pretty big jump. TPCH also did a gaps analysis recently to really try to identify how many units it would take for our community to meet the need for all the people that need housing. And they identified that we needed over 6,200 units, and that includes spots in emergency shelters, but also along, other services and housing options within that. So like permanent supportive housement placements or rapid rehousing vouchers. And I just really appreciated that needs assessment where they talk to people. So I reference it many times throughout these slides. But when they asked the people that were unhoused, how could existing services be improved? They recommended, their top recommendations were longer term assistance. So longer term wraparound support and case management, more navigation. So not just giving a number, but actually having a person there to support them all the way through, looking for housing, getting placed in housing, and questions after the fact. More domestic violence education, which I think really ties into our service intents, but they seem to feel that a lot of providers weren't well versed in that. And yeah, a little insensitive sometimes. And also just more emergency services. And when I say emergency services, I mean like rental assistance services, emergency funding services. Other things, eviction filings. I did see evidence that they're down slightly since before the pandemic, and we talk about new services that have come up, and Dan already referenced it, but I think the emergency eviction legal services program is a big part of that. During the pandemic, we set up some systems to try to help our community members deal more effectively with pending evictions and offer more support to them. So like I said earlier, we've been able to improve our response to that. But again, we're still probably having more evictions than any of us would like. There's also been a real surge in hardship requests. And I call a hardship request when somebody is seeking 1 to 2 months of rent assistance, utility assistance, something they just need funding to meet their basic needs so that they don't end up having to move or choose between food and their housing, anything along those lines. And we're hearing from our case manager partners at United Way that this has just been, the overwhelming need that they're hearing about, matching kind of the numbers that we saw in the pulse survey. And back to that needs assessment survey, the individuals who are now experiencing homelessness, they said that rental assistance and utility assistance would have been the best way to support their housing needs. Anything else about changes in need before we move on to changes in funding and services? Yeah, Dan, please.
I just want to commend you on the presentation. I think you're really hitting the nail on the head that especially what you're hearing on the streets is what we're seeing also is that we lived in a very resource rich environment for a very temporary time with the emergency rental assistance program, where it's gone from tens of millions of dollars down to basically nothing. To advocate and say what are the best dollars to spend both humanely and physically speaking, to prevent an eviction is a few $1,000s, and it avoids children having to live in a car or an emergency shelter, but also the greater cost to society, and then to rehouse somebody is you're looking in the tens of thousands, so not to add bureaucracy to it, but just to echo your point that rental assistance, I think everybody including those experiencing it see it as probably the best solution for the times that we live in, where you have hyperinflation, with Maslow's hierarchy of need, people need a roof over their head, and it's just better primarily, for the people, people, especially children, to keep them housed where they're at, where it is, dignified and humane, rather than having to go through the process that causes trauma and adds costs to society. So, just wanted to add that little bit of color, and thank you for bringing this up and really getting into depth on it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and thank you for all that too. Bonnie, did you want to add things that we had on the fact sheet that didn't make the slide?
Well, you did a fabulous job Lisa, but I just wanted to add, and I don't have pre-pandemic information on this, but I'm pretty sure we know that the number of low-income residents that are rent burdened, so they're paying more than 30% of their income towards housing, is now at half of low-income residents. For very low-income families, it's 77%. And that translates into saying that the minimum wage worker would have to work 76 hours on average to make rent in Arizona. So even with our, higher minimum wage, low income folks are still really struggling just to make the rent and keep it, even under 50% of their income. So I think that's an important data point as well.
Yeah, and really identifying how it's kind of changed recently too. So thanks for bringing that up. All right, I'll move to some of the noteworthy things I was able to glean about changes in funding in this area. And most of this, I briefly touched base with the city's Housing Community Development Department to get kind of their input too. But so these were three things that they mentioned. One is that the entitlement funding overall has been, stagnant or decreased, and really noting specifically that even when entitlement funding is maintained, because the population is growing, our share of that pie will most likely get smaller, and that's something that we've been seeing in our community, our county, in the past few years. Another thing to note is just that there have been so many one-time funding streams, and kind of to what Dan was mentioning earlier, we were very resource rich for a while. And that had consequences with the services. It also had consequences with a lot of the staffing for the programs, and it's created kind of like a capacity issue. But the long and short of it is that we've had a lot of resources come in, and a lot of them have already stopped. A lot of emergency assistance programs, and not just government ones, but private funding too. And there have also been additional resources that have come in with no promise of if they're going to be continued. So our community got a really large grant about a year and a year ago, for supports for unsheltered individuals, but it kind of comes with no guarantee that it'll continue. And so it seems like this is not just something happening at this moment, but might be continuing over the next few years, that we're losing funding. And then just, noting that there have been some major municipal shifts with the flat tax. And for FY25, the urban revenue sharing to our cities and towns is down about 19%, and that translates to about 27 million less for the city of Tucson, just as one example. Anything anyone wants to add about how we're seeing the funding landscape change for community assistance services? All right. Yeah, and I switched around the fact sheet a little bit because I wanted to talk about the money before we talked about services. But, kind of the impact of a lot of those resources coming in and then some of them not staying. We have seen more municipal resources focused on homelessness. There have been some new initiatives that have cropped up, ones that I included here, the City of Tucson Housing First Team. There's also a joint city-county effort called Housing Central Command to support unsheltered community people in encampments. We've also seen increased wraparound service programs that have come up, including that EELS program. The City of Tucson has a new community safety, health, and wellness team that is more focused on prevention. And then there's some really interesting nonprofit efforts that have come up in the past few years. I put HSLA here. That's something from Innovation for Justice. It's called the Housing Stability Legal Advocacy Program. And what they're doing is they're training frontline workers from nonprofit and government to be able to offer some of those legal services. But that is because we have such an enormous need for legal services that even with this EELS program, even with our existing legal support partners, there's still a lot to be done. So I don't want to, imply that because we have these services here that is meeting any the need, or I guess just not that the need is still very great. Like, this is helping us, but it's not all of what we need to actually, like impact evictions and homeless prevention and homelessness. The thing I mentioned earlier, that a lot of the emergency funding has been starting and stopping, and then also, how that's affected staff turnover with programs starting and stopping. Also, just consistently low wages from grants that have not been able to increase, and a high stress environment for a lot of the workers that are working in these kind of wraparound services programs with domestic violence survivors, with unsheltered individuals, and with people in housing crisis. Anything to add about service changes? All right. And just noting a little bit about effectiveness of a lot of the strategies we're already using. A lot of the service intent areas we're funding. There is research to back this up. We know from that bundling services, studies have shown is really effective, especially when you're bringing together employment, income support, and financial management skills. There's decades of research showing that tenants who are facing eviction, who have legal representation or support, are far more likely to stay in their homes and reap all those benefits that Dan mentioned earlier, especially if they have children. Just something I thought was worth noting is in that pulse survey that CIRO does, something that has been kind of consistent I've seen in the past few years is that it continues to be high numbers of renters who are behind, only need 1 to 2 months to catch up. So I think that's just something, to keep in mind about the need and what specifically the need is to prevent the housing loss for a lot of the individuals in our community. And finally, the last thing I just mentioned is that, and reiterate, is that housing has just really been emerging as a key priority from community feedback and also from, policy alignment and adoption in our county and our local communities. We have the Prosperity Initiative, and Bonnie can definitely chime in on that. But it's a framework of 13 policy and 3 cross-policy strategies that I generally think of as really focused on prevention broadly for all populations. And so we have these 13 policies, and there's been a lot of work in the past few months to bring together leaders from nonprofit, from government, from business to say, what are the ones that are the most important that we want to start on right away? And from those conversations, the top 3 have been early childhood education, housing stability, and housing mobility. So housing, those are the 2 housing policies, and they're right there. The city of Tucson also did a budget survey last year. They asked about, what are the top challenges you see in our community? Affordable housing was number 1, homelessness was number 2. And then they also did some additional feedback with their P-CHIP planning for how they're going to invest some of their community development funds. And affordable housing came on top again, along with efforts to decrease poverty was a top 3. And they also did a separate thing where they talked to children. And Bonnie pointed this out and brought it up that even the children, they said emergency shelter, or I think affordable housing was one of their top ones. I didn't put it on the slide. But with the larger group of adults, when they asked about homelessness specifically, those respondents said harm reduction, emergency shelter, and work programs were the top priorities where they would like to see city dollars invested. Any government, I shouldn't just say city, government dollars. And that was,
And Lisa, I would just add, I found out today in a meeting that the chamber has a policy council, and 2 of their top in their 2 top priorities, affordable housing is one of those.
So that was my presentation. I don't know if it was similar or different to what usually happens, but I hope it kind of provided some insight about housing in our community and a lot of the community assistance services. I'll stop sharing.
Thank you, Lisa. I appreciate your investment of time. It's clear that you put a lot of work into that, and I appreciate all the insights and information that you provided in relationship to the funding and service intents that we went over in the last meeting. I just wanted to allow for anyone who had any other follow-up questions that perhaps they had and were jotting down as you were speaking, Lisa, and give them an opportunity to ask now before we move on to the next presentation by Lisa Reams. So if anyone has a question, feel free to either chime in or raise your hand, and I'll call on you if there's multiple hands up. Looks like most of the questions got answered along the way, so I think we're. Oh, whoops, sorry.
Oh,
I
hi.
apologize. Spoke too soon. Sorry about that. Go ahead, Chris.
No problem. Lisa.
Take a
Have
drink of
you-
water if you need to. It's okay.
Yeah.
We'll give Chris a minute here. Water sounds like a good idea. I'll join you. I'll take a drink of water myself.
I sit quietly, and as soon as I go to ask a question. But Lisa and Bonnie, really nice presentation. I really enjoyed that and learned a lot from it. And I was just going to throw out there, have you seen anything on like basic income projects? And the reason I ask is I saw this Denver Basic Income Project, and where they worked with individuals in 3 different groups and gave them either like $1,000 a month, or there were 3 cohorts, or $500 in the beginning, and then more money, $6,500 up front and then $500 over the rest of the year. And the results looked, statistically significant as far as individuals then getting stabilized in their housing situation. Is that anything that you found in your research, and maybe that the county would perhaps, ever be interested in piloting? So I'll step away.
Lisa, if you don't jump in, but just that we did some research into this for the Prosperity Initiative, Chris, and you're right. Guaranteed basic income projects have a lot of really positive research behind them. There's a number of them happening across the country, and I'd be happy to send you some background information on that as well. There's even a site called Mayors for Guaranteed Income that lists a number of these projects. So I think there is really strength in that approach, and I think it just again shows the impact of families just having a little bit more income to be able to put towards essentials like rent that can keep them stabilized and and out of this cycle of constantly getting close to eviction or going through an eviction, and this downward and very expensive spiral both to the family but also to the larger community. The Innovation for Justice had an eviction calculator they came up with just before the pandemic that showed the extensive cost to the community once a family slides into homelessness. So, but, FYI, there was pending legislation in Arizona, I don't believe it passed, but which would prevent a government from sponsoring a guaranteed or basic income project. So, I think that's really unfortunate that there's misinformation out there, but with the exception of if it's a workforce development centered project, then that was allowed. But thank you for bringing that up, and do let me know if you'd like some background information. I'd be happy to share that out.
Yeah, Bonnie, that'd be great. Thank you. I appreciate that offer.
Good. Janine, can you send me Chris's email or connect us so I can do that? Or I'll send it to you and you can pass it through.
Absolutely. I can connect both of you. That's not a problem. Happy to help.
I'll add one thing too. Don't quote me too intensely, but I do think there was one local organization that was doing, I think, Youth on Their Own, I think received a federal grant actually to pilot a universal basic income or some sort of program related to that. And I think there have been some organizations that have tried to do it with private funding, but that was the one exception. And that would make sense if it was the federal money rather than maybe using the state or other Arizona local dollars. But yeah, a lot of good research behind it. And it's something that I heard a lot in different focus groups that were going on for the Plan Tucson, for PCHIP, for a lot of the community feedback. This is something that I know people are starting to try to raise with their government partners and saying this is something we do want to explore. So we'll see if it gets traction.
Thank you both.
And Yodo, in itself is sort of a universal basic income organization. I mean, if young um, uh, youth on their own, are in school, I mean, they get unrestricted dollars. Um, and I'll just say personally, they do amazing work. That money goes to good use, and is sort of life changing to folks. So at least I'd kind of heard that they were expanding that, and I think that's great, and hopefully we'll provide the data and the example for something much larger in the community.
Thank you, Dan. I appreciate that. And thank you, Chris, as well for your contribution there and your insights. I appreciate both of you sharing. And Lisa, thank you again for your presentation. So if there aren't any other questions for Lisa or Chris or Dan or even Bonnie, who had provided some additional insights, I'm going to go ahead and turn over the platform to Lisa Reams for her presentation. So I just want to see if there was any other quick comments or questions before we continue.
Nicely done, Lisa and Bonnie.
Very nice. All right. Thank you again to all of you. I'm going to go ahead and let Lisa Reams. Thank you, Lisa.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So I don't have a fancy PowerPoint to share. That was beautiful. I have something to aspire to now. So Pima Council on Aging tries to talk and present every year about what we're seeing with older adults and the needs of older adults in Pima County. And if you don't know, just to give you a little bit of history, Pima Council on Aging is the designated area agency on aging for all of Pima County, and that's a federal designation, and means that we're also we receive the state and federal dollars in the county to be able to provide the network of community-based social services to help and support older adults. So we kind of have our finger on the pulse of what's going on with older adults in the county and provide most of the state and federally funded core services related to helping older adults stay in their homes, having a helpline for older adults, home delivered meals, those sorts of things. And when I say older adults, these are individuals who are 60 plus, although SSBG funds also assist with allowing us to provide some supports for people who are under the age of 60 living with physical disabilities. So there's a dual purpose there. So my lens, I'll be talking about PCOA, but not from an organizational perspective as much as the role as the designated area agency on aging towards the fact sheet specifically about the Division of Aging and Adult Services. So some of the main things that are listed in this category are related to kind of information and referral, case management, in-home supports, and home delivered meals for older adults. And so that's primarily what I'll speak to, but I'm going to touch a little bit on emergency services and housing needs as well, because we see that so much right now with our helpline and all of the services we're providing, just to echo everything that Lisa shared in that area. So give you a little bit of historical perspective. So talk about our what we call our home and community-based services first. So this is all older adults that meet the state and federal requirements in order to have someone case manage them and help come in their home to provide services and supports to help them remain at home independently and safely as long as is possible, which is really important from a safety standpoint, and also because most of the older adults we're serving, 60% of them are less than 100% of federal poverty level, and 80% are less than 150% federal poverty level. They don't have the means to live elsewhere, and they don't have the means until they become eligible for Arizona long-term care system. They don't have the means to afford a long-term care facility or such. So trying to remain living in their home is really the best way for them to have the housing stability and safety that they need. So that's the niche there that this particular fact sheet is really kind of referring to. So we hit a high of about 1,300 individuals that we were assisting with this within our home and community-based services system throughout Pima County at the kind of the height of the pandemic with COVID, all the COVID stimulus funds that had come through. So we're about 1,300 individuals. We started last fiscal year at 1,151 individuals, and that was not that fewer people were qualifying for it, is that we were intentionally ramping down services because we knew the COVID stimulus funds were drying up, and were going to be done over the next year, and we didn't want to put more people on services that we wouldn't be able to sustain services for. So we began reducing, started last fiscal year at 1,151 and ended last fiscal year at 991 people receiving, older adults receiving home and community-based services. So, and it's reducing from there. We anticipate with the funding levels, and this is the combination of the federal and state funding, SSBG, everything included. We're anticipating that the numbers will level out this year, probably around 900. So that's well over a 30% decrease over the last 2.5 years. In the number, not the number of individuals that need help. That's the number of individuals that we have the capacity to be able to help. There is currently a waiting list of older adults who qualify for services, and there's not the capacity of case managers or direct service staff to be able to help them. And 330 people are currently on that wait list, older adults who really need that help right now. And it can take up to a year to get off the wait list. We don't take people onto the wait list if we don't think we can get to them within a year. So that list would actually be higher, but if we don't think we can get them within a year, we just won't even add them because we just don't think that's fair to them. So that's the reality of case management services for older adults. PCOA provides the case management for that, but we have a community services system. It's a network of providers across Pima County that are contracted with to provide various parts and pieces of that, the in-home support to help those older adults stay living independently. Another part of this is Pima Meals on Wheels, which is the home delivered meals services system through the state and federal government. And so that system has taken even a greater hit with the ending of the COVID stimulus funds. It was up to 1,232 clients receiving home delivered meals. And at the end of last fiscal year, had dropped to 800 people receiving home delivered meals. We had actually always prioritized nutrition for older adults for obvious reasons. And this was actually the first time in the history of PCOA that we had to start waitlisting people for home delivered meals. So we currently have got that down as low as possible. It just hit under 90 individuals that are on a wait list right now for home delivered meals. That's older adults, homebound older adults waiting for home delivered meals. And we don't anticipate any additional government funding, at least to be able to assist with that. We're writing grants like crazy and seeking other community funding to try to sustain and increase capacity for those basic needs assistance. But that's a decrease of 35% in service capacity just over the last 2 years for home delivered meals. To give you another view of what we're seeing. So we run the helpline for older adults. And historically, it's never been a crisis response helpline for older adults in Pima County. That's not really what it's set up for. We don't receive funding as a crisis response service. But from what I would say 7 or 8 years ago was very much kind of an information referral line, or, hey, I need to be assessed for these services, or who can you connect me with? Now 60% of the calls that come into PCOA's older adult helpline are related to emergency assistance and food and housing insecurity. That is a complete turnaround in the last, I would say 4 to 5 years, a complete turnaround. We've had to take one of our teams at PCOA and, whether the funding was there or not, turn them into an emergency assistance program where we've actually distributed over $450,000 in emergency supports and housing and rental assistance and utility assistance, trying to keep the water turned on for people at home and hospice, people that were going to be evicted because, one unexpected payment away, one expected expense away from not being able to afford their housing. So we're doing everything we can to write grants and raise community funds in order to do that work, which we've really never done before as an organization. And we're collaborating significantly with all the other organizations in town that have been mentioned, from the United Way to the City of Tucson's Housing and Community Development and Community Safety, Health and Wellness Programs, CC3, all these organizations, to see what we can do to address specifically the problem of older adult homelessness. And one of the challenges we see the most, which was mentioned earlier, is that older adults don't have the means usually to increase their income. So when housing costs have increased 30 to 40%, when food costs are up 30%, their Social Security has gone up, 6 or 8% maybe. And they don't have the means to go back to work so we're always trying to screen them to see what other things they might qualify for, or what expense reductions that we could possibly help with. But the reality is they just can't afford it so much. So we're doing everything we can to assist with just basic needs assistance, trying to help them stay in their home as much as possible, because a lot of them end up being house rich but cash poor, so they can't afford rent somewhere, but they have a house. So everything we can do to help them stay housed in their own home is a homelessness prevention strategy. So anyway, that's become our world really over the past 3 or 4 years. And thank you to all of you that have helped and partnered with us to brainstorm and try some innovative approaches to help with the really homelessness crisis and housing insecurity crisis and food insecurity crisis faced by older adults in our community right now. We're deeply concerned about it, and unfortunately, it looks like this year is going to be bad and next year is going to be worse. When we're looking at our funding right now for the whole system, the community services system within Pima County for older adults. Happy to take questions, but that's my brief basic overview.
Thank you, Lisa. I'm just going to go ahead and allow for people to kind of raise their hands using the tools on this platform for any potential questions or contributions of insight or thoughts on what Lisa shared. Oh, I see we have a hand raised. Hi, Elizabeth. I'm going to go ahead and let you introduce yourself and share what organization you're from, and then go ahead with what you wanted to share or ask.
Hi, all. This is Liz Cozy from the United Way of Tucson in Southern Arizona. It's just a quick comment to piggyback on what Lisa was sharing, which is that because older adults are in that fixed income category that kind of separates, it makes their situation unique. We have really, really gone the, no stone unturned route to look at innovative solutions for their housing affordability. Everything from home sharing to boarding houses to resident-owned communities for folks in manufactured homes. So just really trying to look at the landscape of best practices in other communities and implement what we can here. Because it's really, we're not seeing a super clear path forward with the normal mechanisms. So, when people talk about the housing crisis and affordability and individuals experiencing homelessness, the reason why we elevate this particular age cohort or try to is that, it's a really unique circumstance. So, just wanted to kind of add that commentary.
Thank you, Elizabeth. I appreciate that. Anyone else have a question or comment relative to what Lisa or even Elizabeth had just shared? Let me go ahead and look for hands up using the raise hand gesture offered in this platform, so I don't potentially miss anyone. All right, I don't see any other hands up. So if that's true, we're going to go ahead and just do one last ask to see if there was anyone that I missed that wanted to do either a brief commentary on some fact sheet information relative to the funding and service intents, or any other presentations that I might have not noted when we were doing our initial introductions. Okay. All right, well, with that said, I'm going to go ahead and move to the next item on the agenda. I'm trying to be mindful of where we are with time so that I'm respecting everyone's time. Right, so we kind of have championed a little bit of this item on the agenda, which is the fact sheet discussion. So what I thought might be helpful for this part, because we do have some individuals that are on this particular call or meeting that were not able to participate at the first one. I thought it might be helpful to just go ahead and put up the funding and service intents for the different broad service categories that the different presentations today were referring to, and then perhaps also show just a glimpse of the others that were not done at this time, but might be done at a future meeting. So I'm going to go ahead and ask my IT support team if they could to go ahead and put that on the screen if possible. And while we're waiting for that to come to fruition, just as a reminder, the different broad service categories are DCS, which is the Department of Child Safety, as you can see on the screen. So thank you for my team for that. And you'll see the different services and associated service intents that were much characterized earlier in our first meeting, that is. And you'll also see the local plan level amounts for state fiscal year 2026. And for brevity, I'm not going to go ahead and read all of them again because we did do that in the first meeting, but I wanted to allow for those that were not able to attend the first meeting to at least see them a little bit here. And if those folks want to reach out to me, be happy to share the slides like I did previously to those folks if they didn't already receive it. So this is for the Department of Child Safety, like I said, and those are the different services: supportive intervention, guidance, counseling, 2 different specific target groups, and then of course, behavioral therapeutic activities. And then we're going to go ahead and move to DAAS, which is the Division of Aging and Adult Services. And this is much in alignment with what Lisa Reams from PCOA had spoke to. And so you'll see here the different services are just like Lisa had outlined. We have the home care for elderly adults, which includes, personal care, home care, housekeeping, home health, and shopper services, case management, and of course, home delivered meals. And you'll see again, the state fiscal year 2026 local plan level amounts for each of those service categories and associated service intents. And much like you'll see throughout each of these broad service categories, the difference in funding relative to the state fiscal year 2025 local plan level to the state fiscal year 2026 really doesn't change much, if at all. So that is for that particular broad service category. And we're going to go ahead and move to the next one, which should be the Division of Community Assistance and Development, DCAD. And there's quite a broad range of lists. And I think this is commensurate with what Lisa Florahan had done her presentation around. And so you'll see the supportive intervention, guidance, counseling, crisis intervention, and shelter services. You'll see the target group associated with adults and domestic violence victims, of course, the associated case management, legal assistance for civil legal matters for low-income residents, and then emergency shelter, and then, of course, housing and support services. And of course, that's for both adults and youth. And once again, there is the column that reflects the state fiscal year 2026 local plan level, and then the associated service intents. So I'll just let everyone have a moment to kind of look through those if haven't already had an opportunity while I was sharing that, and of course during the earlier meeting. And then I'll go ahead and move to the next one, which is Workforce Development Administration, or WDA. And there's only one particular service category for this, and this is employment services. And you'll see, again, the state fiscal year 2026 local plan level amount. And the service intent here is to provide employment services such as childcare, transportation, employment screening, assessment or testing, structured job skills, etc. And you can see all the other particulars associated with that particular service intent. And of course, the services are intended primarily for single head of households, as well as unemployed adults, elderly, low-income adults, youth, ages 18 to 28 at risk for homelessness, families, and of course, rural adults. So those are some of the particulars there. If it was a little hard to see on the screen based on font size and how your screen might be showing up on your end. And then we're going to go ahead and move to the final broad service category, which is RSA, and that is the Rehabilitation Services Administration. And you'll see the two services listed there. And we have interpreter services for deaf adults. And those are deaf adults who need interpreter assistance in accessing needed services. And of course, supportive intervention, guidance counseling for hearing impaired persons, and hearing impaired persons who have problems in adjusting to their disability at work and in family and interpersonal relationships. And then you can see the associated service intent. So while I don't want to put anyone on the spot, I do want to at least allow for a moment for either Jessica Winchester, if she's still on the call today, or perhaps even Chris McNamara, because perhaps they might have just a few insights or some perspective to share relative to those broad service categories. And if now is not the appropriate time, because I don't want to put anyone on the spot, we can reserve that information for another time. But I did want to at least be respectful and allow for that opportunity, since you are on today's call or meeting, and we are doing fact sheet presentations and discussions, if you will, and the organizations that you represent are in alignment with these particular broad service categories. So if either of you have something you'd like to add at this time, feel free to raise your hand or the hand gesture using the platform, or just, speak verbally at this time. Otherwise, I will just open it up for discussion.
Jessica, would you like to go first?
Oh, well, I was just gonna say that I think that one of my other associate directors and I were planning on putting a fact sheet together, at least regarding the deaf, blind, deaf plus categories and some of the workforce issues there. So that's all I was gonna say right now.
Okay, all right. Thank you, Jessica. I know I'm going to make a note of that, and so I'll look for that for you, and then use that information as appropriate for any agenda items that we'll plan for the next meeting.
Good.
So thank you for that. Yeah. And then Chris, I think you had your hand up, so I'm gonna go ahead and turn it over to you.
I just think kind of like everything else that we're looking at, right? There's not enough funding for the need in the community, and there's certainly a great need for these types of services. But yeah, I don't have anything really to add. And Jessica, it's nice to see you, first of all. And if there's anything, if I could be of support in helping you and your colleagues with putting together a presentation, I'd be happy to do so if you're open to that. So.
Yeah, absolutely, Chris. I was working on one for, like I said, the deaf services, but I think a separate topic is definitely workforce development services. So you and I can get together, I guess, next meeting as well.
Okay, great.
And then thank you for that. And Chris, just to clarify, just so I know what to expect and how to plan accordingly for the next meeting, to be respectful of everyone's time. I just want to clarify if you were intending to also submit a fact sheet, much like Jessica, or perhaps you might be doing something in tandem, just based on your brief conversation there. I just want to make sure I'm hearing it correctly.
Well, I suppose that if there's still an opportunity, to put together a presentation, I'd be happy to put that together. And if there's some collaboration that Jessica and I can do, great. And but yeah, long answer or a long answer. The short answer is yes. Let's go with that.
Okay, all right, great. And if something changes, just let me know. I just wanted to at least make sure that you had that opportunity if that's something you wanted to do, and I didn't want to, lose sight of that as we have this discussion today.
Thank
All
you.
right, and I think I see Dan Sullivan's hand up, so apologize, Dan, if I was a little late in seeing your hand up. Dan, did you have your hand up? I'm sorry, I thought I saw it up. Maybe I was mistaken.
I'm sorry. Yeah, I did raise my hand, and then everybody, there has to be one during every meeting where somebody speaks and they're on mute. So I decided to be that guy for this meeting.
It's okay, you're allowed. I do it quite often. I'm sad to report that, but it happens.
Thank you. I was wondering, would it be possible to send out the spreadsheet you presented?
Yeah, absolutely,
Cool.
absolutely.
One thing, after pondering it a little more and looking over the fact sheet, I think there are two overarching issues in I think every community, but specifically, Tucson, Pima County is one, the lack of resources, and two, the lack of the coordination of existing resources. So I was particularly interested, in the resource coordination piece of it. It is something that through the county administrator and Jennifer Darland, who's running the Office of Homeless Solutions, trying to figure out a way to best coordinate the existing services that we have, and then as a community, how we best serve people, through navigation, through call centers, through everything. It's confusing for folks. I mean, even just the Pima County One Stop, going into our services, they're federal. I mean, you basically have to give a pint of blood to get and get a blood test and everything to get basic services. So I'm particularly interested to see, and perhaps do a presentation on what could be done there on coordination and some of the things that we're brainstorming here.
Okay, thank you, Dan. I appreciate that. I made a note of that, and I will, if you don't mind, I'll reach out to you just to make sure that I have appropriate context for that,
Sure.
so that as we plan the next meeting and the potential agenda items, I can make sure I'm really intentional around what that might look like. So
Sure, absolutely, yeah, totally. It's yes, absolutely.
and I think talking into mute just comes with the last name, so it's a Sullivan thing apparently. So
Yeah, it is. We have a lot of quirks as Sullivans, so.
Right. Oh, I see Lisa Florian's hand up. So Lisa, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to flag, especially for anyone that might be doing, a fact sheet or a presentation for next time. It would be really helpful, and I thought Lisa did a good job of this when she was speaking, just to kind of understand how this SSBG funding fits into other funding that comes in, because it is a little bit difficult, I think, to see the full picture of how this plugs in and what kind of role that this funding specifically plays. So if there is any way to do that, it'd be appreciated. But I know that that's also a really enormous question, and one that I was not able to capture very well with my presentation. But if someone else can do it, Godspeed.
So so Lisa, just to make sure that I'm understanding it correctly, your question or opportunity that you presented with regard to how the social services block grant funding fits into other types of funding streams, if you will, that allow for these services to take place in our region. Your ask or your perhaps opportunity that you're suggesting is to allow the opportunity for others who are going to be doing presentations or submitting their fact sheets and speaking to them to perhaps highlight how that comes to pass. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, and I think it's something that would come up in that changes in funding section of the fact sheet.
Okay, perfect. All right, thank you. And so when I send out the fact sheet templates to anyone else who might want to do a presentation or has suggested they want to do one during this particular meeting. I will put a little reminder around that. And then as I do any other type of recap or follow-up emails to this particular group, I will remind folks of that. So if it's appropriate and someone would like to share in our next meeting, assuming it's in alignment with our agenda items, they could put that forth in terms of the discussion or presentation components. So thank you for that. Oh, and I think I see Bonnie's hand up. Bonnie, go ahead.
Hi, Janine.
Hi.
Just can you remind us of the timeline for this? Like, how many more meetings do we have scheduled? And is the sequence and the goal that at some point we're going to make recommendations on actual amounts, you know, how things might change within the current structure of funding and that sort of thing? So
absolutely, that's a really great question, and I think it's a good segue towards like our next item on the agenda, which is I would argue it's probably adjournment. But before I say let's move to the next item on the agenda, let's go ahead and address the question at hand. So yes, we are moving in that direction in terms of making recommendations. So we are currently in the stage where we afford the opportunity for people to either present like a formal presentation, or at least speak to the elements that they notated in their fact sheets. And I had provided a template for each of the different broad service categories to allow for intentionality around the exact same questions being posed and the same kind of structure, so that we are consistent in our approach and that we are employing like the safeguards, right? The guardrails are up for, you know, what we're allowed to speak to and what we're not allowed to speak to. So we are in that stage. And since there are some folks that were not able to attend the first meeting and they are in this meeting, there is the potential for a couple other presentations on our next meeting. But depending on how many presentations we will potentially include in our next meeting, that would kind of help shape whether or not we would still have enough time to have the discussions that are required to be able to offer up recommendations, which would become part of our process for public input, or public comment period, and of course, being presented to regional council. So that is the direction that we are headed in. So our target date or tentative date for our next meeting, just to kind of set some expectations, if you will, is November 7th. And I believe it's tentatively slotted for 2 p.m., but don't quote me on that because I don't have my little cheat sheet up right now to confirm that time, but I'm relatively confident that that's the time that we have tentatively set. But we definitely have November 7th earmarked as the tentative date for our next meeting. And then if we were to need another meeting, because let's say we run out of time based on the number of presentations and it just wouldn't be enough time to actually make those recommendations, we would be potentially looking at another meeting, either arguably the 19th of November or the 21st, but those are speculative at best. Just to at least give you something to look towards or aim towards, I think that might be helpful. Does that help answer your question? Did I
very
capture
much
everything? Okay, great.
And I'm just thinking kind of as homework for us. It sounds like the next meeting could be our last meeting unless there's, you know, so much that pushes it into one more meeting. So
correct.
Would it be a good homework assignment for us to really look at those, the actual numbers that correspond with the different spending categories and come and think about what our recommendations would be?
Absolutely. So when this meeting adjourns and we have our next agenda kind of more finalized, right? So we have confidence in how many presentations there would be, have confidence in will we have enough time to actually make the recommendations. I'll serve up an email to those that are going to likely be participants in this perhaps final meeting. It could just be the third meeting with that exact context that you just shared, meaning we make sure everybody has the information regarding the funding and service intents for appropriate context there, any other helpful reminders, and talking points or touch points, much like what Lisa had shared about how the funding being SSBG funding fits into other types of funding streams, et cetera. So I'll kind of help shape that and make sure everybody's on the same page in terms of what we're solving for. So everyone can be well prepared for our next meeting. And if it is our last meeting, then we'll be in a good posture just to support that outcome. But if it ends up being the third of 4 meetings, then, you know, there it is, but we're still equally prepared.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you for asking that. I think that's a great question. All right, let me see if I see any other hands up with questions or comments before we potentially move to the next item on the agenda, which I believe is adjournment, but I could be mistaken. So, all right, so I don't see any other hands up. Feel free to reach out to me if you have any follow-up questions, or you know how it is. As soon as you leave the doctor's office, you're like, oh, I should ask this question. If that happens, just reach out to me, send me an email, and I'll do my best to answer it. Otherwise, we're going to go ahead and move to the next item on the agenda, which is actually adjournment. And I will look forward to seeing if anyone else wants to submit a fact sheet or do a presentation at our next meeting, and then look for a follow-up email from me. So I appreciate all of you investing time in this. I know you all are very busy, and so to make this commitment, it's greatly appreciated. So thank you again, and thank you to our 2 presenters today, and for all the people that were just here learning and sharing insights. It's greatly appreciated.